Hello and welcome, fellow motorsports fans. Drama in the McLaren F1 camp despite Piastri getting his maiden victory, and a pretty similar storyline over in the Formula E final is only one of the many things we are going to talk about this episode. In case you are new to the channel, we talk about all things single-seater racing here, so traditionally we begin with the slowest of the categories. We begin in everybody's favourite Formula 4 series, the Italian F4 Championship. And truth be told here, I had most of the script finished after the second race and wanted to talk about what does it take to actually beat Freddie Slater on merit, because yes, he didn't win all the races this time around because he got a DNS in the first race, went on to absolutely dominate the second one, as you'd expect from him by now. And so I thought, yeah, we will just talk about, okay, he can only lose races when he DNFs or DNSs. But in the third race, we did find another way to actually beat him, and that's by putting him on the wrong tyre on a drying track. He was on the wrong tyre choice in a race entirely decided by the tyre strategy. So yes, he only won one of the races here, but don't let yourself get fooled. He is still clearly the best driver on the grid. It's the way he wins these races, no matter the scenario, that's really impressive for me. Just look at this clip here, where once again he takes the lead from Akshay Bora in the race. Yeah, how can you stop this man is really the big question here. I do think he will go on to do great things. I do quickly want to highlight the winner of the wet third race, or mixed tyre strategy third race, because Keen Nakamura, one of our really promising karting graduates out of the year, finally delivered his first win in the series. Yes, it definitely hasn't been the season we expected from him, especially after the strong debut in the F4 UAE, but nonetheless, hopefully this gives him some confidence going forward. He actually had to fight for this one, keep in mind. Yes, he was on the optimal tyre strategy, but obviously he wasn't the only one, and he did have to beat Gustav Johnson in particular in a pretty good wheel-to-wheel battle for the win, so he had to work for that one. Truth be told, overall for the Italian F4, the order is pretty settled, although in like a weird way, where the top 10 contenders do tend to be the same ones most of the week, except for, we talked about it a lot in the past, the like P9, P10 spots where different people sneak into the points. So really the more interesting bracket tends to be the P10 to 20-ish for me personally. Instead, I want to highlight an off-track storyline from the Italian F4, and it happened just after uploading last week's episode, and that is Andrej Petrovic is out of the AAX squad for unknown reasons, but the way he did phrase his Instagram post leads me to believe they didn't exactly split on great terms. So bit of an odd one. According to Reddit, nobody seems to know any more details, but if you do, then please let me know down in the comments. Same track, similar level, but a different series altogether. We continue with Euro Formula Open, and here, truth be told, the big story is just still the depressing nature of the series. Yes, Brad Benavides is still leading. He got 3 podiums to slightly extend his championship lead. It really doesn't feel particularly meaningful going up against only 4 full season competitors. Jacob Bergmeister finally got his maiden victory, which honestly, it is about time in this series. It almost sounds mean. He's not the worst driver on the grid, but come on, it's definitely nothing to praise him for big time, let's just put it this way. And unfortunately, after winning the race, he went back to his old mediocre self, so that wasn't exactly a big thing to be happy about, all things considered. We did have a new face on the grid for this week, and that's sadly quite mediocre French F4 graduate Enzo Richer, who debuted, and he was miles off the pace. I mean, yes, he's debuting mid-season, we know how difficult this is, but just from how quickly the gaps were building, it looked like he's off by about a second. Not really acceptable on this level, so while I hope he can pick it up, let's not hold our breath and expect him to change the tide of the championship. There was some interesting news for Euro Formula Open, and those are not about this year, those are concerning next year. And that is, they actually announced a new chassis for next season, the Dallara 324, and new Toyota engines as well. So this, at least, combined with obviously the full schedule announced for next year and everything, this, I hope, must mean they have some people committed to the series, maybe more than just Motorpark and one BVM entry. So it does give me that tiny bit of hope that next season might not be as depressing, but we will find out soon enough. In the slightly quicker cars of the Formula Regional European Championship, Rafa Kamara has fought back. We've criticized him last week. We were talking about, oh, is he actually going to throw this championship? And he has immediately shut us up collectively, basically, with a dominant win to bring the gap back up. And yes, he did have a bit of a struggle in the second race. But then again, his main rival, Tuka Tarponen, had more of a struggle, mainly by crashing with Enzo Peugeot for a quick DNF. So definitely a very good weekend for Kamara to get his championship back on track, basically, or rather to ensure that he is still the overwhelming favorite for the rest of the season. Brando Badoea, who we've also talked about recently, about having a really cool streak of P2s, unfortunately first got that snapped in the first race by only finishing in third, and then he also got a DNF right after, so his streak unfortunately ended. But on the other side, we do have a new face back at the top, and in this case it's Alessandro Giusti with a dominant win in the wet in the second race. That was very cool to watch, and this also brings him back ahead of James Wharton in the championship. So while the actual battle between Kamara and Tarponen is looking more and more decided with every week, just because, well, essentially Tuka is running out of time in the season, the spots below are still quite heavily contested with a bunch of really good drivers. One of those drivers, who we expected to be in the mix before the season, and again, also one we did criticize last week and really every time we talked about FRECA, is Yuga Chukwu, and he also got one of his redemption drives here in the wet, once again with a pretty great charging drive to take P2. And I guess this means, yes, he is still a bit of a question mark, no doubt about it. This season has not been the performance we expected by any stretch. But here he had the opportunity to show his class. I don't know if he's just not really gelling with the car, or is his height more of an issue in this car. I really doubt that's the case, but I mean, it could be. I'm not an expert on these kinds of things. But either way, here he had an opportunity to show that while, yes, he is not the front-running force we expected, he can still very much drive race cars better than most, really. There's a couple other people we can highlight here, though, and that is the rookie battle, which so far we really haven't talked about all that much, mainly because I do find the categorization between rookie and non-rookie a bit random. I mean, as I consider it in my own head canon, you're a rookie if it's your first year in the car. So Tuka is a rookie, for example, even though he's not classified as one because he did the Middle Eastern Formula Regional in the winter. But either way, the actual rookie championship is between Evan Gilter, Ivan Dominguez, Noah Stromstedt and Pedro Claro, and in this case it was Evan Gilter finally fighting back. He obviously started the season really strong and then sort of dropped off a little, as did the team a bit, and now he's back at the sharp end, and so I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to talk about who I actually rate highest out of these, and it is Gilter, no doubt about it. He was a phenomenal guy in karting already. He graduated to French 4, took the title in his rookie season in pretty convincing fashion, all things considered, and, well, immediately stepped up to FRECA and showed his pace here. So in my book, at least, he is quite comfortably the most interesting of those four drivers. One last shout out, and that is to Dorian Pan, and somehow obviously we've talked a lot about her on this channel before, but never about her FRECA campaign aside from the initial announcement. And this is because, well, all things considered, her FRECA showing so far has been pretty abysmal. She's been absolutely nowhere, but this weekend it has finally turned around a little bit, and once again here it was the wet weather that brought out the best of Dori Pan. She put it on P8 in the qualifying for the second race. And while the actual race was a bit problematic for her, she did lose quite a few duels, but she still finished at around P14, comfortably her best result all year long, and I really hope she can build on this. I didn't expect anything from her in this championship just because it is her first year in single-seaters, so this is a step too much anyway, but I do hope this is a 2-year program, and in this case she is now finally showing some sort of promise that next year it could be significantly better. Anyway, on to the F1 weekend. F1 did visit the Hungaroring with all its support categories, so naturally we begin with Formula 3, where the championship has had a bit of a shocking weekend all around because Gabriele Mini, Luke Browning and Arvid Lindblad all had a pretty shocking weekend, all things considered. Beganovic also not exactly at the sharp end, as you at this point basically expect from him, unfortunately. And combined with a really solid run from Leonardo Fornaroli, this means the Italian is now back in championship contention, can you believe it or not? This F3 season just keeps taking twists and turns and everything, and really nobody knows who is an actual favourite at this stage of the season, which is quite interesting because obviously we are quickly approaching the end of the season. Crucially, I guess quickly growing fan favourite Christian Menzel, I think is fair to say, is also now remotely back again in the conversation with yet another very consistent weekend. And really, he has been one of the breakout drivers, I would say, all the way from like the end of last year and then basically throughout this season. Really, he has proven to be such a reliable pair of hands. Yes, he might not be an absolute front runner or an F1 threat basically, but I do think he is a really capable driver and just really fun to watch really. In general, it has to be said though, his team art did have a really good weekend all around, which also means Nikola Zoloff finally secured his first feature win, and he is really having the season we kind of hoped for last year already, and where he's now showing all the potentially showed in his Spanish F4 campaign 2 years ago, and now he's finally bringing it to the F3 grid. And I really hope, I don't know if he'll get the call up to F2, I suppose it might be a little early. I would almost like to see him actually fight for the championship, but either way now he looks ready to do whatever is assigned to him for next year really. Unfortunately, his teammate Lawrence van Eupen, and we do know him as a driver that I do like to forget, so let's quickly highlight him here. He had a great race, got a P2 on track, and then got disqualified afterwards for being underweight because I believe the explanation was he lost some sort of fluid from the car, which meant it was underweight after the inspection. So very unfortunate loss of points here, but apparently no cheating attempt, so that's pretty important in my book. One storyline we've talked about in the comments a couple of weeks ago was the situation of the AIX squad in Formula 3, whereas obviously in F2 they've had a couple really good, like surprisingly good results this year with win and podiums and everything, and in F3 it has been pretty abysmal all around, as expected, truth be told. But obviously they have Nikita Bedrin, who is a known quantity in these cars and, you know, just known to be a really good driver in these cars, so I tend to expect him to sort of extract the most out of his machinery, and here he did because they nailed it this weekend, AIX did, and allowed Bedrin to beat Beganovic in the sprint race to the win. But the more important story for me is that crucially it was his teammate Tazanopol Intra Pruvazek who was actually with him and actually also found his way past Beganovic to take an unprecedented AIX 1-2. And we've talked about Intra Pruvazek in the comments, and he's been a little disappointing. I thought he had a really good start to the season and then dropped off a cliff basically and just disappeared like most of the squad, to be honest. But here it really showed that yes, he is clear-cut the second best in the team compared to Dufek, who's really nowhere to be seen. Intra Pruvazek actually brings some talent to the table. Over in Formula 2, what else could it be really at this point? The main story of today is once again my boy Andrea Kimi Antonelli with a tale of two interesting tyre strategies really defining his weekend. In the sprint he gambled on the soft tyre, whereas actually it turned out the hard tyre was the optimal strategy. He made decent use of the soft, took the lead early and everything, and only for the tyre to completely fall apart way before the end of the race, and he actually had to retire, or I guess change tyres. Either way, he was well at the back at the end of that race. Quite undeservedly so, but I suppose it was a gamble and it did not pay off. He could have maybe looked after the tyres a little better, but let's just say he definitely wasn't the only one to ruin that particular set of tyres. In the feature, on the other hand, he was one on the alternative strategy, and here it paid off wonderfully because the safety car timing did work in his favour and actually allowed him to take a pretty dominant win on fresh soft tyres. Beautiful stuff really, and I mean, yes, of course, he did have the ideal strategy, otherwise he would have not won the race most likely. Probably would have been Victor Martins, who was P2 as the front runner on the normal strategy. But I do want to point out it's the way Antonelli got to the win that was once again pretty impressive, and my personal highlight was a really opportunistic move on Saint Maloney in the infield of the track, so not into turn 1 or into turn 2 where you normally see the racing. So yeah, Kimi is getting racy, and this is the stuff we all love to see from him. We've talked about him maybe not quite being all that comfortable with the wheel-to-wheel and cars and everything, but obviously he has pulled off his fair share of incredible moves in Formula 4 and Formula Regional, so it's great to see that it's finally translating to the quicker machinery as well. For the championship itself, we had yet another dramatic weekend all around, with just people not scoring points that should have scored points. The biggest one here, Isaac Hadjar, absolutely fucked over by Campos. They apparently missed some sort of signal to put the car on track. I don't know if it was a traffic light or something, whatever. They did not put the car on the grid in time, so Hadjar lost his good grid position going into the feature race and had to start from the pits instead. So he was a bit angry about that, as you can understand. And then his main rival, I guess, Paul Aron, did take himself and Saint Maloney out with a bit of a dumb move in the feature as well. So this means Gabriel Bortoleto did get a great point swing in his direction. But yeah, I don't really know what's going on with the championship here. Hadjar still the favorite. Paul Aron looks to be crumbling under the pressure, if I'm honest, a little bit. But Hadjar really just needs to be able to beat his own team and bad luck at this point to secure this title. I really hope whoever is making the decisions at Red Bull, takes good notice of every single one of these incidents to put his end result into the correct context at the end of the season. Quick driver spotlight, as is tradition. Indian driver Kush Maini finally got his first ever win in the series in the sprint race, so I thought that would be a good opportunity to talk about him a tiny bit. He's been rushed to F2 last year, if I remember correctly, because they had budget issues and basically had to decide between doing another year of F3 or doing F2, because chances were either could have been his last season in racing, in this type of racing. Obviously didn't turn out this way because he actually adjusted to the F2 really quickly last year, and I thought he was just criminally underrated, to be honest, in the sense that he just wasn't talked about, which usually, if you're a rookie, a bit maybe outside of your own skill bracket, and that's a good thing because you're not embarrassing yourself, right? But either way, I just wanted to highlight, yeah, he's actually a really decent driver. I don't really know where his career will go. Apparently there's some Formula E connection, which could be a thing, or maybe he could join his brother in sports car racing one day. But either way, I think it's great to see Indian talent flourish in motorsports as well. Now then, finally, let's talk about the entertaining mess that was this weekend's Formula 1 race. And obviously I presume you've all watched it, so we don't need to go over how things happened, but there's two key things we do need to talk about. The main one, obviously, the McLaren team drama with Norris getting track position over Piastri in the pits because McLaren decided to pit him a lap earlier, and then essentially he was asked later to return the position. And my main thing with this entire situation is, first of all, we have to be very clear, this is McLaren's fuck up. It's not on Norris making a slow decision or whatever. It's not on Piastri for whatever reason someone would put all of this on Piastri. This is 100% on McLaren for various reasons. First of all, there should have been a plan in place for these kind of scenarios before the race. You do need to be sure, are we fighting for the championship? As in, do we prioritize points on Norris or do we not? Do we fight for track position and team results, essentially? Do we just say whoever's got the lead into turn one can keep it? Which is, in my opinion, given the state of the championship, that would have probably been the most sensible approach. And by all accounts, it looked like that was their plan, right? Like, Piastri gets to take the win because he had the lead, and all we care about is the result for McLaren. And then they sort of didn't quite stick with that because they decided to pit Norris early. And one thing that I haven't really seen talked about all that much here, so feel very free to correct me in the comments if I can't read a timing tower, but as far as I saw it, there was no need to overreact with the pit stop. I feel like they could have just pitted Piastri on the lap they pitted Norris, and could have pitted Norris a lap after and would have still kept track position. The gap was still like 4 seconds when you got into the pits. So that's a bit of a bizarre one for me anyway. I thought they could have just avoided the entire thing by pitting in the appropriate order without losing position. And then obviously the second part of the story is, yes, Norris should have probably just given the position up earlier, because then he would have been allowed to fight Piastri to retake it, ideally. So that is on Norris in a sense. Obviously his race engineer could have said as much, but just a really bizarre scenario, and one that you really can't have happen in a team that wants to fight for championship titles in the very near future. I mean, ideally they want to construct this year, but then you really need to sort out your inter-team mess, essentially. it is a big moment for Lando Norris as well, and that has been talked about a little, but like while watching, I was really, okay, this is a crucial moment to see what Norris is all about as a driver and everything. And for me personally, I've seen my fair share of comments that said, oh yeah, he's not a proper winner, you know, he's doesn't have the champion's mentality, because a true champion would never just give up a position like this. And I can see where people are coming from, but I think it's really crucial is, again, the situation. Had he been in the championship fight, like properly, then yes, 100%, he should just take the win and ignore everything else. That would have been the correct choice. In this sense, I think his engineer did kind of nail it by saying you can't win the championship alone, and it's in the sense that it's too early to do so because you're not going to do so this year. So why ruin the, like, why risk the team environment for nothing, essentially, for 7 points that will most likely be meaningless at the end of the season? So I do think he made the correct decision, even if he shouldn't have been forced to make such a decision in the first place. The other big story from F1 for me, and it's more of a side story really, and a bit of a, you know, personal issue I had with this week's broadcast, but that was Crofty and his constant joking about Max Verstappen sim racing all night and being a bit grumpy because of it, which honestly, first of all, Verstappen has always been this grumpy when things haven't gone his way, in particular since he's been disused to winning. I mean, we've been all memeing about him crying about every single tiny bit of understeer or whatever while he's dominating races. Of course he's going to get angry if he's struggling to get home P5. So that was a big one. And I think it was, I don't want to say unprofessional, but such a silly narrative to try and push, in my opinion. As a joke, I think it's pretty good, don't get me wrong, but it was so overdone that it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like that's actually what he believes happened, and that's just ridiculous in my honest opinion. Either way, he was still better than Perez, so we'll find out soon enough if Perez will still be around after the summer break, if the rumors are to be believed. But that is a story for a different episode, so instead let's talk about some electric racing. Formula E had its season finale in London, and it was an epic championship showdown, just like we had hoped for. Going into it, we did have 4 people technically in mathematical contention, but obviously Antonio Felix da Costa did get taken out in the first race pretty early on, so that did slim it down to only the 3 main contenders anyway, the 2 Jaguars, Nick Cassidy, Mitch Evans, and then Pascal Wehrlein in the Porsche, sort of in a 1v2 setup with really Evans and Wehrlein the main contenders. Cassidy was off, I believe, 12 points going into the last race, so he would have really needed a pretty big gap to his competitors. And in the final race, we did have these 3 drivers fighting at the front basically all of the race. That was really good. That's exactly how you want this sort of championship race to play out. And here again, we did have team order drama because, well, both Jaguars were still in title contention. So Jaguar more or less decided to let them handle the situation themselves instead of working together, trading track position in attack mode, and basically making sure they first and foremost beat Pascal Wehrlein and then focus on the infighting after. That would have been the correct choice. Instead, they sort of left the drivers to it, which ended up being disastrous for the entire championship run. Cassidy eventually did get taken out by Antonio Felix da Costa in a really unfortunate turn of events, and that really wasn't necessary. But then again, like I said, the main battle was between Evans and Wehrlein anyway. And then it was an epic scene, but still a bit anticlimactic at the same time, because at the end of the day, the title did get decided by Mitch Evans missing the attack mode activation thingy twice, and thus losing track position to Wehrlein, and all Wehrlein needed was to finish ahead, which, well, thus he did. And we didn't really get an epic on-track showdown to the line or anything to actually decide the title. Tiny bit sad, but it really shows how much Jaguar across the board have thrown away this particular title. I am personally really happy for Wehrlein. I'm, well, not really a massive Wehrlein fan or anything, but definitely a Porsche fan. So, you know, it has gone my way. I'm quite happy here. And I thought after last year, he definitely deserved the title as well. But to be honest, the big story in terms of the championship for me, after the dust is settled, will be how Nick Cassidy managed to throw this particular championship away. It so looked like his to lose like halfway through the season, and he seemed to crumble under the pressure to an extent, and like it's the second year in a row. That must be incredibly heartbreaking. So yeah, really, it's a tough one. Let me know what you make of all of this, but yeah, it was his to lose, wasn't it? Last but not least, at least we did have a feel-good story to end on, because there was a championship winner, but there was also an on-track winner, and the on-track winner was Ollie Rowland getting redemption after essentially getting taken out of the championship fight with illness because he had to miss a round. He did at least get his redemption win on home soil with his daughter on the podium. Just a really cute picture all around. And yeah, between him and Antonio Felix da Costa, they were like the two fan favorite underdogs. Well, for me, I'm a fan, so for me they were the fan favorite underdogs, and I really, really hope he can mount a proper championship attack next year. But yeah, what an amazing season of Formula E it has been. Some of the track choices need to be reconsidered in the future, I might argue, especially London as well. There's just lead people to drive a bit like it's indoor karting, you know, so it's not the cleanest affair, not the purest racing ever, but it certainly delivers an entertaining TV product at all times, and it's just fantastic to watch all around. Anyway, let me know all of your thoughts about Formula E down in the comments. Maybe let me know if you want a proper full Formula E season review. I might make one. And otherwise, I thank you all for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next one.